In the 19th century, the fishing village of Stonehaven was an important centre for the herring trade. The fishing catch steadily declined due to overfishing, and by 1939 it had virtually ceased. Now, this picturesque harbour town is a mecca for tourists from the south. The oldest surviving building in Stonehaven is the Tolbooth at the harbour. It's thought to have been built by George Keith, the 5th Earl Marshal, for use as a storehouse during the construction of the nearby Dunnottar Castle. It's been used, amongst other things, as a prison, but is now a museum. For centuries, Stonehaven held an important strategic position. Aberdeen, 15 miles further north, was effectively cut off from the south due to the Grampian Hills and the boggy ground surrounding the Portlethen area. The bogs are known locally as mosses. During the last ice age, the ice dug shallow depressions into the hard rock. When the ice retreated, the hollows left behind filled with water and vegetation, creating vast areas of boggy ground. Most have now been drained and have become farmland. An ancient path between Aberdeen and Stonehaven, which avoided the bogs, was improved in the 12th century by the construction of the Causey Mouth, a raised rock causeway spanning many of the boggy areas such as the Portlethen Moss. The Causey Mouth became a drover's road which forded the River Dee near the old Bridge of Dee. Cattle were taken across the ford for sale at a market at Rotherson in Aberdeen. It was down this road in 1639 that the Earl Marshal and the Marquess of Montrose led a Covenanter army of 9,000 men to defeat the Royalists in the first battle of the English Civil War, the Battle of the Brig of Dee. Montrose at that time was a staunch Covenanter. He later swapped sides to fight with the Royalists. The clifftop walk to Dunnottar Castle begins at the south end of the harbour. Walk to Wallace Wynd, past the cafes and pubs on the seafront, but remember to stop for refreshment on your return journey. There's a short climb up to a viewpoint overlooking the harbour, where a welcome seat awaits. Below the impressive War Memorial, the coastline opens up, providing a view of the Dunnottar Sea Stack. Between 5000 BC and 700 AD, it's believed that the Picts established a substantial fort on Dunnottar. The University of Aberdeen archaeologists have recently established this to be the oldest Pictish fort ever discovered. The stack has been eroded by the sea over the centuries, and access is now difficult without climbing equipment. In 1832, some young lads found 5 very early Pictish symbol stones on the summit. They were rescued and are now in the grounds of Bankery House. It is thought that the Picts eventually moved to the nearby Dunnottar Stack further south. The cliffs and stacks south of Stonehaven are not formed from granite like those further north, but of sandstone and a hard conglomerate known as pudding stone, due to its similarity to a Christmas cake mixture. Dunnottar has held an important role in Scottish history for centuries. It is thought one of the first notable visitors to the promontory was St Ninian, around 400 AD. It's difficult to pin down exactly who St Ninian was. However, tradition has it that he converted the Dunnottar Picts to Christianity. There are contradictory stories about an attack on Dunnottar around 900 AD. It's said King Donald II was killed here during a Viking raid, but other sources blame the Gaels and say that he actually died in forests in Murrayshire. Whether it was the Vikings or the Gaels, they destroyed the buildings and what infrastructure was here at that time. The gateway to the castle would have originally been protected by strong wooden doors and a portcullis. On the right of the gateway, overlooking the castle entrance, is Benham's Lodgings, another defensive structure protecting the gateway. In 1276, William Wishart, Bishop of St Andrews, consecrated a stone chapel here. Most of the chapel ruins we see here today date from the 16th century. Only a few parts of the original 13th century chapel remain. Perhaps these little arched windows. In 1297, during the First War of Scottish Independence, English forces held the Dunnottar Fort after an English invasion the previous year. There is a legend that William Wallace's Scottish forces entered the castle through this hidden entrance. After gaining entry, Wallace mounted a merciless attack against the English garrison and wrestled back control of the castle. There were no English survivors. Many may have met their death here after taking refuge in the chapel when Wallace set it on fire. In 1320, the Declaration of Arbroath was signed by Scottish nobles, asserting Scotland's status as an independent sovereign state. It defended Scotland's right to use military force when unjustly attacked. English forces, supporting Edward Balliol's abortive bid for the Scottish throne, attacked and seized Dunnottar in 1336. The English intention was to strengthen Dunnottar's defences and use the castle as a forward supply base for the English army. The English plans failed when Sir Andrew Murray, regent for Robert the Bruce's young son, led a force that recaptured Dunnottar and again destroyed its defences. Repeated Scottish raids into Northumberland eventually forced the English to negotiate with the Scots. In 1338, Edward III of England agreed to a truce with the Scots. Eventually, on 20th January 1356, Balliol surrendered his claim to the Scottish throne in favour of Edward III of England. In exchange, he received an English pension. The keep of Dunnottar Castle was built in 1392 by Sir William Keith, Great Marshal of Scotland. This was the first stone fortification built on Dunnottar. The building of the keep incurred the wrath of Pope Benedict XIII because it stood on the consecrated ground of the parish church. For this sin, Sir William Keith was briefly excommunicated. But after he built a new parish church nearer Stonehaven, a mollified Pope Benedict issued a papal bull lifting the excommunication. All that remains of Sir William Keith's original Dunnottar Parish Church in Stonehaven is the Marshall Aisle, nowadays a mausoleum for the Keith family. Mary Queen of Scots had two brief visits to the castle in 1562 and 1564 while visiting the northeast of Scotland. In the late 16th century, George Keith, 5th Earl Marshal, added several more buildings to the castle. It was the same George Keith who in 1593 founded Marischal College in Aberdeen. Marischal College was Aberdeen's second university after King's College, which had been founded almost 100 years earlier in 1495. The Marischal College's granite building that we see today was constructed between 1835 and 1906 and is now leased by Aberdeen University to Aberdeen City Council. King James VI of Scotland inherited the English throne in 1603 on the death of the English Queen Elizabeth I. On the death of James VI, his second son Charles succeeded to the throne. His elder brother had died earlier. King Charles I, who believed in the divine right of kings, attempted to impose an Episcopalian version of the Book of Common Prayer upon the reluctant Scots. In February 1638, representatives from all sections of Scottish society agreed to a national covenant, pledging resistance to religious right reforms. They became known as the Covenanters. The Protestant Reformation had created a Presbyterian Church of Scotland that was Calvinist in doctrine. Royalists viewed the monarch as head of both the church and the state. But the Protestant Covenanters believed that the king was head only for secular matters, and Christ Jesus was King of the Kirk. The 7th Earl Marshal, William Keith, was a staunch Presbyterian and so declared his allegiance to the Covenanters. Remember, he and the first Marquess of Montrose, James Graham, had fought together for the Covenanters against the Royalists at the Battle of Brig of Dee in 1639. 6 years later, Montrose led a Royalist army north to persuade his erstwhile ally Keith to join the Royalists. William Keith stuck to his principles and refused to negotiate with the now Royalist Montrose. Montrose's efforts at persuasion failed, so his army laid waste to Stonehaven and the barony of Dunnottar. Charles I was executed in January 1649, and England briefly became a republic. Not so in Scotland, as many still supported Charles I's son, King Charles II, as King of Scots. During the turbulent years of the War of Three Nations between Scotland, England and Ireland, the Scottish crown jewels, the honours of Scotland, were held for safekeeping at Dunnottar Castle. In 1650, after an 8-month siege, Oliver Cromwell's army sacked the castle in search of the Scottish crown jewels. But they were too late. They had already been smuggled out by some brave women, led by Mrs. Granger, the wife of the minister at Conneth Kirk, just a few miles south of Dunnottar. One story has it that the women hid the honours under their skirts and boldly walked past the English army unchallenged. Another story suggests that the women pretended to be gathering seaweed on the shore. The jewels were lowered down on a rope and they used a small boat to spirit them away. What isn't disputed is that they were then hidden here, buried below the pulpit of Conneth Parish Kirk for several years. Visitors to the church can view replicas of the honours kept in a glass case in front of the pulpit. In 1685, 167 Covenanters and Whigs were imprisoned in this cellar in terrible conditions for refusing to acknowledge religious reforms imposed by King Charles II. They had earlier been imprisoned in Edinburgh, but the authorities feared a possible rebellion staged by the Duke of Argyll, and so they were marched north to a safer prison in the fortress of Dunnottar. 5 prisoners died in this vault. 25 escaped, but 2 died falling from the cliffs. 15 were recaptured. 37 Whigs were released after taking the oath of allegiance to King James VII. The remaining prisoners were banished to the Americas as slaves. Several of the Covenanters who died here are buried in the nearby Dunnottar churchyard in Stonehaven. They are remembered on the Covenanter's stone. The inscription on the stone is impossible to see now, but it reads, "Here lies John Stott Aitchison, James Russell and William Brune, and one whose name we have not gotten, and 2 women whose names also we know not, and 2 who perished coming down the rock, one whose name was James Watson, the other not known, who all died prisoners in Dunnottar Castle anno 1685, for their adherence to the Word of God and Scotland's covenanted work of reformation. In 1707, during a period when Catholics were being deposed and outlawed in favour of Protestants, the Scottish and English parliaments were united to form the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Queen Anne, the last Stuart monarch, died in 1715 without leaving any children. Her second cousin, George of Hanover in Germany, was the closest living Protestant. 56 Catholics with superior hereditary claims were bypassed in favour of George. He succeeded to the British throne as George I. Not surprisingly, James Stuart, the Old Pretender, son of the former James VII of Scotland, saw himself as the rightful heir to the throne. He mounted the first Jacobite rebellion. Like many parts of Scotland, Aberdeen and the North East were staunchly Jacobite. On 12 September 1715, James Stuart was proclaimed king at the Market Cross in Aberdeen. George Keith, 10th and last Earl Marshal, took an active role with the Jacobite rebels and led cavalry at the Battle of Sheriffmuir. The rising failed and the Old Pretender returned to France. George Keith was convicted and executed for treason for his part in the failed rebellion. His estates, including Dunnottar Castle, were seized by the government. In 1717, the castle was sold to the York Mining Company, and everything of any value was removed, thus ending Dunnottar's important and colourful part in Scottish and British history. In 1745, James Stuart's son, Charles Stuart, landed at Glenfinnan on Loch Shiel in a last attempt to oust the Hanoverians and claim the British throne for the Stuart lineage. The Battle of Culloden on the 16th of April 1746 finally put an end to the Jacobites' claim to the British throne, when Bonnie Prince Charlie's army was decisively defeated by government forces. Lord and Lady Cowdrey purchased the ruined castle in 1919 and carried out conservation and restoration works to protect it from further deterioration. This spectacular ruin, now owned by Dunecht Estate, has been used as a setting for several Hollywood movies. It continues to be one of North East Scotland's major tourist attractions.